This podcast is for the short story, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. You can find this on page 118 of your eFictions textbook, and you should only listen to this podcast after having read the story. The main things I want to talk about in the story deal with the unreliability of the narrator, which has to be understood in order to fully understand the plot. And we've discussed the concept earlier in the year when we had the first person narrator in The Great Gatsby, Nick Carraway, of course. And we discussed whether he was biased or not when it came to his description of characters, when it came to his, um, basic approach to the American dream, and especially to Gatsby and wealth. But in his case, if he was unreliable, it was pretty light bias. And in other stories, such as this one, you have a different kind of unreliability, and it deals more with her mental state. That by the end of the story, we can obviously see that she has descended into some kind of total mental chaos, and there's evidence of this earlier on in the story as well. So we can't take what she's saying at face value because, though she's unaware, her reality is very different from the reality of others. And so, from the beginning of the story, we see that she is writing in a journal, and that she is somewhat sarcastic, even in the very beginning of it, when she talks about how John in paragraph 5 is laughing at her, but one expects that. Then also on the next page, page 119, paragraph 28, that he is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. And we see that the relationship is pretty strained, and a lot of it seems to come from the fact that he is, first of all, a man, and can't be questioned because of that. But what compounds that issue is the fact that he's a doctor, and therefore, his word is seen as, backed up completely by an entire institution and his education and so on. So, though she knows that there's something wrong with her, and that she's suffering what it appears to be from depression, acute depression, he sees nothing wrong with her. And so he thinks that the best way to cure her problem is to give her as much rest as possible, for her not to be writing, for her not to be doing anything, which we know today, of course, is a recipe for disaster, and somebody in that situation who should be really doing the opposite. And so that's established on the first couple of pages. But on page 120, we get the first evidence in which this narrator is not reliable in the way that she sees things. She talks about the history of the room, and established on the page before, by the way, is this sort of gothic setting, and this room is the epicenter of it. And the windows are barred for little children, and there are rings and things on the walls. And it's just a strange kind of description of a room that would be for children. Later on, in fact, we see that the bed is nailed to the floor, as if that's something that you would have to do in a children's bedroom. We also see that the bed is gnawed, and she says, "Oh, those crazy kids," as if that's like a common thing that kids do, is chew on the side of a bed. And we have to sift through all of this as a close reader and understand that in reality, they're imprisoning her in there, and they're afraid of allowing her to move the bed because it could be dangerous, because she could use it to climb out the window. The bars on the window are to prevent her from committing suicide, and the chewing on the bed is either from somebody else who's been put in here or from herself. And the yellow wallpaper to her is some kind of supernatural, ghost-like decoration, rather than in reality just some distasteful old wallpaper. So, regardless, if we turn to 121, at the top, I think it's important to understand that though this husband is pretty detrimental to her health because of the way he approaches things, he is trying to do what's best. He's doing what he thinks is best. And because the culture in general wouldn't listen to women in these kinds of situations, because the culture even today looks at doctors as being, of course, the knowing everything, and therefore we put a lot of trust into them, and a lot of that is needed, but a lot of times we still listen to them when it comes to specific diets and things like that. And then later we find out, oh, how stupid that was. And in the medical field, it's very hard to question, because so many people have done so much research and put so much effort into it that people start to take things for granted. And he's trying to treat her well. I mean, at the top of 21, he's taking her in his arms and calling her a little blessed little goose and so on, but he treats her like a child. In his mind, though, that's what he's supposed to be doing. He's playing the role of the powerful, strong male that he's always been taught to play. He's trying to be a good husband. He's doing whatever he can for her, but it's really doing the worst thing for her and isolating her all the more. Turn to page 124. Here we start to see established this motif of the word creep in paragraph 125. We see this repeated throughout the story, especially at the end, where she has to creep over him every time. And I think the significance of the word deals with secrecy, and how if women during this time had some other kind of dream in life, had other kinds of viewpoints in life, that they would have to hide these things from their husband because it would not be acceptable otherwise. And this is repeated, I forget how many times in the story, but you can especially see it on page 127. If you turn there, halfway down the page, it's almost every line that the word comes up. And she even makes the comment in line or paragraph 195 that most women do not creep by daylight, that they cannot allow themselves to be seen doing whatever it is they want to do. They have to hide these things. So turn to page 198. Here, once again, when she's talking about Jenny wanting to sleep in the same room with her, staring at her, looking at her clothing and things like that, of course, the narrator thinks that it has something to do with Jenny trying to figure out the wallpaper, the pattern of it, before she does. Obviously, that's not reality. Reality is that they're concerned about her and wondering why there's yellow paint all over her clothes, and also wanting to sleep in the same room with her to see what she's doing and to try to figure that kind of thing out. And the narrator does not understand this, so we once again have to figure that out on our own because she's not reliable. And then at the very end of the story, the reason why she faints is often brought up, or why he faints, the husband. And it could be because, of course, she's torn off all the wallpaper and he is so shocked by it that he faints. It could be also that she says, in spite of you and Jane. Who's Jane? I mean, she's obviously to a level of insanity at this point that is making it difficult for her to even communicate with anybody or see reality. And it could be something more than that, though. It's the fact that she has stood up to him and challenged him as a male and as a doctor. And she says, basically, that she has freed the woman from behind there. I think we can look at the woman that she sees back there as some symbolic of herself, and she's trying to free herself from these bindings. And also that she is able to free her mind. Remember that the yellow wallpaper seems to symbolize her mind and how she can't figure it out, and that the pattern is intricate, and every time she thinks she's about to get the pattern and to understand it, it ends up doing something different. And so if we consider all of those things, it could be that he's shocked that she has figured herself out. He's shocked that she has stood up to him and that he can't handle this change at all. And that's about it. Thanks for listening.